Hello, everyone out there in Radio Land. It is once again that time of the week. What time of the week is it? It's that time of the week where we dig underneath the headlines. We look at the mainstream media's capitalist propaganda, and we dig underneath all of that and get to that straight up truth. We analyze current issues from a deft leftist lens, all the way from the international down to the very local level. It is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. And I want to thank y'all for tuning in. Congratulations to all of the students out there, maybe almost finished up with the semester. Hooray for that. I know back when I was going to Western as a student in the early or late 2000s, early 2010s, it was always a joyous time of year. So, we have a lot to talk about on the show today. A big prop / shout out to Will and Aya. For holding it down last week. I was gone. I had to go to a community meeting, but between the two of them, and I did go ahead and listen afterwards. It was a very, very good show. They had some really great analysis and had some of the folks from Extinction Rebellion on to talk about what they're doing here in Southwest Michigan, both their action at the Crossroads Mall and just the climate crisis in general. Really recommend everybody check that out. That's up on our YouTube page. It's our show from last week. I believe it is from December 4th, off the top of my head. This week we got a lot to talk about. I am going to be flying solo this episode, kind of complete opposite of last week where I wasn't on the show at all. Now it's just all Hoodrat all the time for the next, 2 hours at least. I'll give you a little overview of some of the stuff we're going to be talking about on the show. We've got, corrupt Democrats at the state and local level. Those are going to be kind of the two issues we guide off with. One is an issue, both involve issues revolving around transparency. And one of them is at the state level, one's right here at the county level. We're going to be talking about that. Also, a little bit of good news, good-ish news about a local corporation or a corporation that's going to be investing locally to clean up their own mess. We ended up on a list. I don't really like this list, and I'll tell you why later on. 10 most affordable cities in the United States. Don't really like that. It was, again, I'll dive deeper into that later on in the program. But I'll just say, the kind of article it was, from the source it was from, makes me feel like it's kind of ring the dinner bell for gentrifiers. Oh, no. Oof. And, of course, a huge bombshell just dropped, and I hope y'all aren't spending all your time distracted by the impeachment hearings to have noticed this, but Washington Post dropped the Afghanistan papers, a very huge and comprehensive investigation. It's pretty shocking, jaw-dropping, and very in-depth into the failures, the cascade of failures that have happened since we invaded Afghanistan about 18 years ago. So, yeah, we'll be diving into that a little deeper later on. Some other stories. We've got the abortion law in Kentucky that got upheld by the Supreme Court, unfortunately. And some local foolishness, I guess I should say, or just a really, really bad call from a local hospital, Bronson Hospital, about a patient who needed some language assistance. So let's go ahead. We're going to dive into, this is at the state level. Before we begin, I want to another special shout out to TDK for that music you heard in our intro. It's from their forthcoming solo project. That song was called "Guillotine for the Nazi," or guillotine. Yeah. There it is. Well, if you're the French, you know what that's all about. We'll probably talk about that on the show later on. France. Largest mass uprising since '68, all told. Some really big deal what's going on over there. But before we get to revolution solutions that are sweeping the countryside in other countries, let's talk about the counter-revolutionary solutions that are popping up right here in the state of Michigan. So this is from Michigan Progressive. Just a little background. It's a kind of independent media blog. A lot of the folks who used to be involved with Michigan for Revolution are part of the writing staff for it. And this is Michigan Democratic Party approves sweeping recording and photography ban for all club, county, district, caucus, and state party meetings. This is by Liano Sharon, and it was published December 8th. Again, you can find us at MichiganProgressive.com. On Saturday, December 7th, at the quarterly meeting of the Michigan Democratic Party State Central Committee, the party voted to approve a ban on all visual and audio recording and photography for all county, club, district, caucus, and state Democratic Party meetings, unless prior authorization is... Hold on just a second, everybody. I'm not going to lie to you. I need to use the restroom. Put a pin in that thought. We will be right back. I'm back. Sorry about that disruption. As nature calls, you gotta go. In the meantime, you've been listening to the smooth sounds of Armut and Fizgig Henson. This is from a live show they did at the Black Lodge. I believe it's back in 2013 or so. Yes. All right. So let's get back to the story we were talking about before my digestive system so rudely interrupted all of us. So, again, just to summarize what we're talking about, the Michigan Democratic Party has banned audio and video recordings of its meetings unless prior authorization is given by Lavora Barnes, the current chair of the Michigan Democratic Party. The ban states the following. There shall be no audio or visual recording at any meeting of any MDP unit without the prior approval of the MDP state chairperson. The new ban was initiated as a change to the party's rules by Tracy Kornack, treasurer of the Michigan Democratic Party, at a meeting of the State Party Rules Committee. After passing the Rules Committee, it was sent to the State Central Committee for a vote, the official governing body of the Michigan Democratic Party. State Central Committee sets rules for all clubs, county parties, caucuses, and all chartered organizations within the party. The ban was approved. 122 in favor, with 36 against. And so that means it wasn't even close. Those people on the State Central Committee voted almost at a 4-to-1 ratio to eliminate transparency at these public meetings. The ban was seen by many activists as retaliation for posting a video showing the vote at the State Central Committee meeting in St. Ignace earlier this year. The party voted to kill a resolution supporting a presidential debate specifically on the issue of climate change. The majority of people at the meeting voted for it, but the resolution was defeated by a few people with many extra votes by paper proxy. Several of them never elected to cast those votes. Despite the fact secret ballots are forbidden by party rules, leadership was embarrassed. In addition, the author of this piece was told by high-ranking party insiders that the ban was specifically in response to his articles and reporting about the Michigan Democratic Party on this site. Several others were separately told the same. Others who spoke in favor of the ban argued that it will help prevent Republican operatives from recording Democratic meetings and using that information and video to hurt the party. There's no way to stop operatives from recording meetings. If they decide to do it, they're going to do it. The only defense against their edited videos is the full and accurate video recording of the meeting, which this policy prohibits. Also, prior MDP rules allow all Democratic meetings to go into closed session when discussing sensitive topics. The ban poses many practical problems for leaders and members of the Michigan Democratic Party chartered clubs, county parties, caucuses, and district parties. Want to record a candidate at your local club? You'll have to ask the state party chair for permission. Want to live stream something at your county party meeting? Make sure to ask permission. Take pictures of meeting attendees? That's prohibited too. Without permission from one person who surely has better things to do than pick and choose who can and can't take pictures at a meeting. Many of these concerns were raised by those who voted against the ban, to no avail. Others raised concerns about the barrier to access this could create for young people, working people, and those whose disabilities make it difficult to attend meetings, core party demographics necessary for victory. Those concerns were all ignored. So again, you can find the full article on Michigan Progressive. Michigan Democratic Party approves sweeping recording and photography ban for all club, county, district, caucus, and state party meetings. So I think I'll talk a little bit. I do have a little bit of inside knowledge. It's been a minute since I was deeply invested in state Democratic Party politics. I used to be part of the same group that Liano comes from, the Michigan for Revolution. They effectively took over the Progressive Caucus. There's a whole lot that goes into that. I'm not really going to go into, but I think this kind of ties back to the reasons, some of the primary reasons I stopped organizing with that whole kind of entryist strategy in mind. And it's chiefly because of this. if you have an outlying strategy, it's like, well, if we get enough young, radical, progressive people to get involved with the Michigan Democratic Party, you can make it progressive, et cetera, et cetera. The problem is history doesn't necessarily bear that out. As a matter of fact, a lot of times where this strategy has been followed, it's been met with opposition from, essentially what you're trying to do is beat the rule maker at their own game. Michigan Democratic Party makes the rules. And they are part and arm of one of the two capitalist parties here in the United States. So, do I think this ban would have gone through or even been a possibility if you had a more progressive leadership in the Michigan Democratic Party? Well, no, of course it wouldn't. But structurally, I think it needs to be understood that, yes, a lot of these petty things come up, kind of retaliation, et cetera. It's a very small world when you get involved in this kind of political organizing. But functionally, these sorts of bans on recording, whether it's audio or video, benefits a particular group and a particular group alone. And that those are those folks within the Democratic Party who are basically kowtowing to very specific interests. Interests that, well, it's not very popular these days to be seen rubbing elbows with. Now, let's, to be frank, the Democrats still do have a lot of low information voters, and I'm sure they're all very excited to be voting for Joe Biden in a couple months. But an increasingly large demographic of not necessarily Democrats, but the kind of voters that Democrats need to actually win elections are increasingly skeptical of the Democratic Party, or they are increasingly cynical about its intentions. And putting the proof in the pudding, as it were, by, banning some very basic transparency measures, only entrenches that. We're starting to see a lot of these blue no matter who memes and people, coming out of the woodwork online. And this is the stuff that makes people not want to blue. You really blew it, as a matter of fact. Oh. And for a generation like myself that is, maybe trying to decide between Bernie Sanders and an actual real physical revolution, it's just another sign of the times that, again, you have this atrophied leadership in the Democratic Party almost at all levels that they're not willing to change. They do not understand the faults in their own party. And you even see this a little bit at the local level. I know Jake Andrews recently stepped down as chair, and a lot of it had to do with lack of diversity, lack of outreach, and, the fact of the matter is that, he basically was younger than most of the Kalamazoo County Democratic Party leadership by about 40 to 50 years. Young people are not getting involved with the Democratic Party in large, super significant numbers unless it's part of these kind of, DSA strategies, which have had different levels of efficacy around the country. But, for me, knowing the kind of culture around the Michigan Democratic Party, it makes complete sense. And they also, it's very hypocritical, too, because, publicly... And this is, you've kind of seen this through the course of the primary as well, but, as somebody, I kind of saw this even earlier. Their very first convention after the 2016 election, and I think this just describes it perfectly, they were really trying to sheepdog the progressives, really trying to inhibit them, as a matter of fact. All the while, they, heavily promoting, using Bernie Sanders' image. I remember when I was at this convention, they put him in some of the footage, and included in, this plenary about, union organizing. The whole crowd cheered, woo, yeah, Bernie, 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 Bernie. But functionally, they do not like what him or his wing of the party actually stands for. And they will buck against those policies, and if you're trying to bring transparency, they will codify the opposite. So again, big props to Liano for sharing that with all of us. Maybe are not paying as close attention to local Democratic Party politics. But again, just a little bit more proof in the pudding that, reformism is a difficult task, and especially in a country like the United States, where, you've basically got two parties set up as different arms of capitalism, the good cop, bad cop, as it were. And we will have to wait and see, I suppose, what happens, especially is throughout this crazy election year that we got coming up, how that's going to shake up the local and state parties. But keep in mind, just this is how they function, even at the local level. Y'all listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. Your only source for political revolution. We're going to go to a quick break, but stay tuned. We'll come back. We got a lot more to talk about. Keep your dial locked.
Wider is. Wider is.
I ain't getting out of bed today. 9 to 5 to survive. There's gotta be a better way than waking up.
Wider is. Wider is.
Living lonely is a life that I've been living.
Wider is. Wider is Radio Evolution.
Depression can take many forms. It can feel like static in your brain, or as if everything around you has lost meaning. It can debilitate even the strongest of people. 89.1 WIDR is here to tell you that there is help and a way to improve mental health. WMU offers counseling for all students in the greater Kalamazoo community at Kzoo Health Center. There is no need for an appointment for first-time visits. Open counseling times are Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Friday from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. or Thursday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Kzoo is located at 1903 West Michigan Avenue, Kalamazoo. For more information, please call 269-387-3287 or visit www.wmich.edu/healthcenter.
On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes.
We've been at war for 18 years now. We're not
Hello, we are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. So let's go ahead. We're going to talk about another local story. Because again, this is, we told me we'd be related. Some more kind of local shenanigans. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say corruption, but definitely a grown-worthy mistake from a local politician when it comes to issues involving transparency. So I'm going to play a quick audio clip here real quick.
Tracy, it's Julie. I know you.
So this clip you're about to hear, this is from County Commissioner Julie Rogers to County Commission Vice Chair Tracy Hall. And this is involving their recently fired corporate counsel, Beth White.
I can't talk right now, but I wanted to give you a heads up. So I just got off the phone circling back with Lindsay. She is probably going to FOIA more stuff like texts and emails regarding Beth today. So I wanted to give you a heads up. If you have texts regarding Beth, you might want to not have those in your possession anymore. So I will circle back with you. I'm going to the women's lunch for KCDP at lunchtime, so I don't know if you're going to be there. I could also chat with you a little bit then. Bye.
So let's explain a little bit of the context around that. And there's actually a few other things that the article here doesn't really go into, and I thought I would elucidate some of those extra details for everyone as well. So basically, here's the rub. This does break certain laws involving transparency and freedom of information. So from the article, encouraging fellow elected officials to delete messages could be considered a violation of FOIA law, Freedom of Information Act. Jennifer Dukarski, Deputy General Counsel for Michigan Press Association, said, "The public should know this activity is going on," she said. "It's unacceptable at any level." Commissioners unanimously voted to fire the county's lead attorney if she did not resign before 5 p.m. on Friday, November 8th. The board did not immediately give a reason for White's dismissal. After White's termination was finalized, an email signed by Rogers, Hall, and County Administrator Tracy Mord advised commissioners to be reluctant to comment at all and avoid factual statements if at all possible, according to documents obtained by MLive. Timestamps from the FOIA request show Rogers' voicemail was sent before the FOIA request was sent to the county. However, Dukarski said she believes Rogers' actions could still be considered willfully and intentionally failed to comply with this act or otherwise acted in bad faith. Under MCL 15.240B, the county could be subject to a civil fine of not less than $2,500 or more than $7,500 if found in violation of the state's FOIA statute. "I can't think in legal terms of many things that are more scandal-ridden for a politician to do," she said. Rogers issued a statement to MLive Tuesday afternoon after a reporter questioned her about the voicemail. "I regret my recent voicemail communication to Vice Chair Tracy Hall. I regretted it immediately after I left it," Rogers said. "No public records were deleted or destroyed following the voicemail communication. I acted in haste and frustration after the termination of the county's former corporation counsel." So, I want to, you can read the full article if you'd like. It goes into a little bit more detail. I think those are some of the more important details. But it's from MLive. County Chair recommends Vice Chair get rid of text to avoid public release. And it was published on December 10th, written by Lindsay Moore. So here's the extra bit of context that's not in the article. I think it's very important to bring this up. Beth White was fired because she essentially was, many of you, if you're a regular listener, you remember we've reported pretty consistently on the many scandals revolving around County Treasurer Mary Balkema. And she was recently... what's the word? Not vindicated, I guess, from the Michigan State Police were investigating her on charges of basically nepotism, corruption, stuff like that. And, you know, what basically happened is, you know, she followed the letter of the law, but she definitely did some stuff that was unethical, and she kind of has through her career. But it was Beth White who was the original whistleblower of that investigation that didn't actually end up getting Balkema prosecuted. Oddly enough, and we did report on this at the time, she ended up getting fired very soon after that, which is head-scratching and at least makes one go, It is very peculiar for a whistleblower to be fired in such a manner, and particularly for a county commission to act and behave so clandestinely afterward. And I guess I'm specifically talking about Rogers, but some of these other communications speaks of a county commission that does not want people digging too deep into the who, what, when, where, and why of this whole situation involving their fired corporate counsel. Honestly, I think there could be a bigger story here. We have to wait and see. But I would guess that this whole saga involving Mary Balkema and the county commission is definitely not over. I would be interested to see what else can be found, especially in the communications that were FOIA'd around this whole situation with Beth White. And, you know, as soon as we do hear anything more on this story, we will make sure to update all y'all listening out there. Again, this is pretty important stuff. Want to make sure that we can properly ruminate on it. And, yeah, for Julie Rogers' part, I hope she learns her lesson. You can't say stuff like this that is, one, just that obvious and that and against transparency when you are an elected official. And it'll be also interesting to see how this plays out in the race for state representative, because there's actually 3 different members of the current county commission who are all vying for that. Julie Rogers is one of them. I do know that at least in this constituency, stuff like that doesn't play very well. But again, we will have to wait and see how this all pans out for all of the interested parties involved. So I wanted to go to another article. I referenced this earlier while we're still on a local kick, talking about our fair city of Kalamazoo. We were recently featured in an article. I'm pulling this from Motley Fool. The author is a certified financial planner and investment advisor. So you can kind of tell, my anti-capitalist self, I am a little nervous about the implications of this article. And I'm going to read it because I want you to kind of really feel how this is worded so that I can go kind of dive into a deeper analysis and y'all aren't going to think I'm just some tinfoil hat guy or something. So this article is 10 best cities for high salaries and low cost of living. So right there, even in the title, 10 best cities for high salaries and low cost of living. How you, a rich person, can exploit a city with a low cost of living. So, yep. There are some parts of the U.S. that are extremely cheap to live in. The problem is that most of those places also have relatively low average salaries, which tend to cancel out the financial benefits of cheaper housing, groceries, and other expenses. However, maybe there are places that offer the best of both worlds. To try to find out, the Ascent analyzed cost of living and salary data for more than 200 of the largest metropolitan areas in the United States to see where the best combinations of high salaries and low cost of living can be found. Kalamazoo, Michigan, and Huntsville, Alabama have the best salary to cost of living ratio. Those are the key findings. Talk a little bit more about their methodology here. The cost of living index is designed so that a score of 100 corresponds to the average cost of living in U.S. metropolitan areas. For example, a score of 200 would mean that it costs approximately twice the national average to live in a certain area. Other cities are cheap when it comes to certain expenses. In Kalamazoo, Michigan, for example, housing costs just over half of the national average. It's at 53.3%, which is a good thing. It's why I can pay $300 a month to live in a 5-bedroom house with me and my roommates. But the pay is also lower. in Kalamazoo. And it's also skewed a bit. Something we should understand is that average businessmen's salary here in Kalamazoo is pretty high, or just slightly lower than the national average, whereas those of blue collar and skilled workers, the working people, are around the same, if not lower, significantly lower actually. I make $11 an hour at my job as a caregiver. Most people around here, whether you're a burger flipper, you're doing some kind of food service work, hovers around between $10 to $12 an hour. Not a whole lot. And then, of course, a whole lot of minimum wage jobs, which is, again, around 8-something. So it breaks down. Our cost of living index is 77, and that is the lowest in the country. Mean annual salary is $47,060. So here's what makes me nervous about articles like this. It's articles like this are meant as kind of a dinner bell, like I mentioned earlier, to upwardly mobile business professionals and gentrifiers, people who want to buy up property and turn it around for a very certain sort of person. And ending up on the national radar, for these upwardly mobile business professionals, in my mind, it is not a good thing. Because when the wealthy people that, again, this article is explicitly targeting, again, title of the article, 10 Best Cities for High Salaries and Low Cost of Living, it's informing other rich people around the country, people who are not tied into our culture. Hey, the getting is good here. Why don't you buy up some real estate? And again, how gentrification works, the mechanics of it is lots of rich people buy up lots of property. Property values start to go up. I mean, the very thing that this study points out is how low our housing rates are. Well, obviously, if property values start going up and property development companies want to specifically target or market towards these upwardly mobile business professionals, which they almost always do. That's how housing functions under capitalism. Then you're going to end up with average people with average salaries, people on low income being displaced, being pushed out. There are particularly a lot of people in my neighborhood, the Vine neighborhood, a lot of people on the north side, east side, and Edison, all very concerned about this happening where we live. And to a certain extent, it already has. An apartment complex geared towards this specific population, the rich, upwardly mobile business professionals, is actually almost completed right down the street from me over on Cedar. I'm talking, of course, of the luxury apartments over on Cedar and Rose, which, studio costs something like $900 a month. And this is right on the corner of the Vine neighborhood. So you can understand why there would be a pause for concern. So, again, these things are always fluid. Our low housing costs, which are, again, because many Kalamazoo workers make under the national average, it's one of the few saving graces of this city. If I had to work the job that I do now with housing rates that were comparable to, say, Chicago or New York, or, well, let's say Chicago because New York's kind of an outlier even among large metropolitan cities, I wouldn't be able to afford it. I would probably be living under a bridge somewhere or living out of my car. And the very people that this article is geared towards are the very agents of change that could shake that up and cause housing rates to skyrocket fairly quickly. Gentrification happens pretty fast. It starts fairly slow, and then all of a sudden, lifelong residents can no longer afford a place to live. So, you can find that article. Again, that's on The Ascent. 10 Best Cities for High Salaries and Low Cost of Living. And if you understand the ramifications and mechanics of gentrification, some understanding of why it is concerning that this wealthy guy running to other wealthy guys is recommending our city as a place to move. Because when they move in, structurally, poor people have to move out. And we're going to close up some of this local news with a little bit of good news. Although it's one of those stories that's like it's only really good in the context of the kind of nightmare capitalism that we live in, where corporations can just pollute and screw up your ecology of your city willy-nilly without any kinds of consequences. Well, this is a story about, what really should happen everywhere, happening in our city. Hooray. Title of this article was published today. Company to pay $255 million for cleanup of Kalamazoo River Superfund site. From the Associated Press. One of the companies responsible for polluting an 80-mile stretch of river and floodplains in southwestern Michigan with toxic chemicals will pay at least $245.2 million to advance a cleanup effort that began more than 20 years ago, federal officials said Wednesday. NCR Corporation will fund the dredging of contaminated sediments and removal of an aging dam in the Kalamazoo River under an agreement with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. Department of Justice, and State of Michigan, officials told the Associated Press ahead of an official announcement. The Kalamazoo is polluted with... Kalamazoo is polluted with PCBs from paper recycling mills. Used for ink removal, the chemicals were discharged into the river from the 1950s to the mid-1970s. They also seeped into groundwater and surface waters from landfills where mill wastage was dumped. In addition to the river, the contamination zone in Allegan and Kalamazoo counties includes a roughly 3-mile section of a tributary called Portage Creek, as well as mill properties, riverbanks, and floodplains. It is on the federal Superfund list of hazardous sites. Signs posted along the river warn anglers not to eat the fish that they catch. So yeah, the big-time pollution that's existed for upwards of, almost 6-7 decades now. Well, yeah, about 7 if you're going from the 50s. EPA has overseen the removal of nearly 450,000 cubic yards of soil and sediment from the area since 1998, in addition to cleaning up 7 miles of the rivers and riverbanks. 82 acres of landfills containing PCBs has been covered in layers of clay, topsoil, and vegetation to prevent the toxins from leaching into groundwater, which is always a concerning method because potentially something could happen to the sediment to shake some of that toxic material loose. It is never as safe as outright removal. The dam, which was built in 1898 so a little bit of context here. Among the tasks, dismantling Trowbridge Dam in Allegan County. The dam, which was built in 1898 to supply electric power to Kalamazoo, is in poor shape and has been overtopped by high water. It is the highest priority dam removal planned in Michigan, according the State Department of Natural Resources, which set aside $2.9 million in May to get the project underway. The first step is to stabilize the structure so that it won't collapse while a contractor dredges PCB-laden sediments from a 2.4-mile river section upstream, which is expected to take 3 years, said Paul Reich, the EPA's on-site coordinator. NCR funds will pay for that work and for raising the dam when the sediment removal is complete, Assistant U.S. Attorney General Jeffrey Bossert Clark told the AP. The removal of tainted soils and several floodplain spots is also funded under the deal, and the company will also pay $76.5 million to the EPA to cover past and future costs of the river cleanup. $27 million to other federal and state agencies for damages to natural resources, and $6 million to the state for past and future costs. The proposed settlement was filed in federal court Wednesday. The public will get 30 days to comment, after which the government agencies could make revisions before questioning final court approval. The agreement represents a significant milestone in the overall cleanup, which is expected to end up costing around $851 million, Clark said. Payment negotiations are continuing with other companies that share responsibility for the pollution, including Georgia Pacific, International Paper, and Weyerhaeuser. The Kalamazoo River Project is among those on the Superfund list designated by the Trump administration for special attention because of cleanup delays, Irving said. So again, just kind of a microcosm. It was a little bit of a win, but again, the cost versus damages, for a corporation like NCR, $245 million is still relatively a drop in the bucket, and we've had decades and decades of ecological destruction, toxicity, and health problems for Southwest Michigan residents and, flora and fauna for all of these years. And it's only now where we're starting to see these corporations being held financially accountable. Think about that. The 1950s, about 70 years ago. I'll tell you what, if we're going to hold these corporations accountable, it needs to be a lot quicker than that. 70 years, not a very good turnaround time, especially when you're looking at kind of time scales that we're going to need for things like, say, the climate crisis. Oh boy, not so great. And I also wanted to really talk about this story from Bronson Hospital. And this was an example of, especially somebody in the medical field, it really boggles my mind how this was able to happen. But this is an article. They wrote about this in the Battle Creek Inquirer. It was published on December 9th. It's written by Ellen Dernbaugh. And article is, patient who speaks limited English was turned away from appointment at Bronson Hospital. So I'll go ahead and read from it, and then I'll talk a little bit more about just the agonizingly, just how bad of a screw up this is. Lai Pui, and forgive me if I'm massacring the pronunciation here. Lai Pui took the day off of work on Tuesday to go to her MRI appointment at Bronson Hospital in Battle Creek. When she came back for the procedure, Pui, who is a Burmese speaker, was turned away because staff in the MRI department said there was not an interpreter available. Her husband offered to translate, but hospital staff said that would not be allowed. Instead, they were handed a note with a phone number. Reschedule MRI, it said, tell them you need an interpreter. Under federal law, hospitals are required to provide language services to patients with limited English proficiency. Although Bronson does provide language services, and Pui has used them before, on Tuesday, hospital told her no interpreters were available. After Tuesday's incident, Thane Maui, Pui's sister-in-law, filed a complaint with Bronson Hospital, the U.S. Department of Justice, and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. I am hoping that the Department of Justice and DHHS will investigate further into this matter. We don't want other limited English proficient population to have this happen to them in the future. Bronson Hospital provides 3 main language resources for patients, including on-site interpreters, phone interpretation services, and remote video chat interpretation through an iPad, according to Beth Washington, Vice President of Community Health, Equity, and Inclusion for Bronson Healthcare. Family and friends are not allowed to provide interpretation due to legal protocols, but all language services are provided to patients for free by the hospital, and patients don't have to request accommodation ahead of time. To be treated like that and be looked down on felt really bad on our part, Pui said, with Maui translating for her. Pui said that her husband asked about the other translation services, but he was told that the phones were broken and the hospital didn't have iPads. When I said call for a phone interpreter, they said they're not called a phone interpreter, they're called an iPad. And when they said, do you even understand what I'm saying to you? Do you know what an iPad is? Pui said. After that, Pui said a staff member went to go look for an iPad and came back with a note instructing them to reschedule the appointment. For the past 6 months, Pui has been experiencing severe dizziness and headaches. She works full-time at a factory at Fort Custer, but due to her symptoms, she's had to take the equivalent of about a month off of work. Pui's appointment had been scheduled since November 27th. After Paui was turned away from an MRI appointment, Maui called the hospital and asked that the MRI be rescheduled later the same day so that Paui wouldn't have to take any more time off of work. The MRA scheduling department told Maui that it wouldn't be possible. So here we've got, this is a whole confluence of different issues. You have a hospital with staff that sounds like they're not properly trained in these language protocols, which, you know, you might not face this situation every day, but there should at least be a resource for them to turn to easily access this information. And the fact that the phones and iPad was not working, which you assume, Bronson is not just in Battle Creek, of course. We've got branches here in Kalamazoo and elsewhere. They've got a robust network for these translation services. The idea that the hospital couldn't try to work through these issues with them and try to set something up is pretty lazy and outrageous. And it's also outrageous that it sounds like this hospital staff was not properly trained to deal with these language barriers. Also, we're at a kind of an intersectional class issue right here, because this person is a blue collar worker. They work at a factory. English is not their first language, and as somebody speaking, like, losing a day's wages can be all the difference between staying sheltered and being on the street, or paying your bills, or getting your groceries. The fact that the hospital is just oblivious to this, willfully oblivious to this, speaks to a really alarming class dimension. They were not adequately prepared, they were not adequately trained, and because of that, this woman has to take even more work off that really she cannot afford to do. Well, what are you going to do? You can either work or you can get your health looked into, and apparently you only got one choice here in this particular situation. Going on, Paui said that although this is the first time anything like this has happened to her at Bronson, some of her friends have had similar experiences. Said she wanted to share her experience so that other people wouldn't have this happen to them too. I hope that Bronson in the future can do a better job of providing services to limited English speakers, so they don't have to feel like how we are feeling right now, Paui said. In response to the complaint she submitted, Maui said she received an email from Bronson Battle Creek patients Relations said her concern was being reviewed and the hospital would directly respond within the next 45 days. So again, I hope Bronson Hospital does better. I hope it trains its employees better and makes sure that these resources are available especially for working class non-English speakers. It really is unacceptable, and I think it really does show a class dimension. I'm gonna guess if this woman had been wealthy, maybe like a Saudi prince, or related, have somebody with diplomatic immunity, they'd probably have an interpreter ready but quick. Well, for this working class, factory worker, better luck next time. Hope you can reschedule at a time in the future where because again, this was them, where we don't drop the ball. So I think with that, we're going to go ahead and go to break. Y'all are listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
I hated the Colonel with his wee beady eyes and that smug look on his face. Oh, you're gonna buy my chicken. Oh!
89.1 FM, WIDR.
Dad, how can you hate the Colonel? Because he puts an addictive chemical in his chicken that makes you crave it fortnightly, smartass!
Kalamazoo.
Hello, wider listeners. We are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. So I think we're going to go ahead. Let's talk about, this is a huge story. Washington Post recently dropped an expose called The Afghanistan Papers, A Secret History of the War. I wanted to focus on a particular article here, At War with the Truth. U.S. officials constantly said they were making progress. They were not, and they knew it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to read a couple excerpts from this, and then I'm going to play a video. It's about 17 minutes long, but, I'm flying solo tonight. Good chance to give my throat a little bit of a break. But here's the main header. Confidential trove of government documents obtained by the Washington Post reveals that senior U.S. officials failed to tell the truth about the war in Afghanistan throughout the 18-year campaign, making rosy pronouncements they knew to be false and hiding unmistakable evidence the war had become unwinnable. So let's just go to a couple of highlights here. So, here's a really interesting one. Okay. Several of those interviewed described explicit and sustained efforts by the U.S. government to deliberately mislead the public. They said it was common at military headquarters in Kabul, and at the White House to distort statistics to make it appear the United States was winning the war when that was not the case. Every data point was altered to present the best picture possible. Bob Crowley, an Army colonel who served as senior counterinsurgency advisor to U.S. commanders in 2013 and 2014, told government interviewers. Surveys, for instance, were totally unreliable, but reinforced that everything we were doing was right. We became the self-licking ice cream cone. John Sopko, the head of the federal agency that conducted the interviews, acknowledged to the Post that the documents show the American people have constantly been lied to. So I also want to go down and read this little bit here. Sorry, there's a whole, this is a very deep article, so finding the little bits I want is, it's a bit of a search. Probably should have highlighted this earlier. All right, so... you know what? I think I would recommend everybody check this out. The Afghanistan Papers, this one's At War with the Truth. It goes into a lot of detail. And it's part of a multi-article just leak. Again, I did not have time to read through all of this material before the show. Actually, I don't know if that's even possible. There's hundreds of pages. A lot of people are comparing it to the Pentagon Papers. My only caveat with that is I think anybody who's been following issues related to the Afghanistan war for a while, particularly like people on the anti-war left like us, a lot of this isn't going to come as a huge shock in the same way a lot of the material from the Pentagon Papers did. Some of it is stuff that we already knew or at least had a pretty good inkling about. But especially this At War with the Truth article really exposes the level of media propaganda that the government was engaging in. It's amazing, like reading through this article. They mention like 8 specific talking points throughout both the Bush and Obama administration and the Trump administration that they would use and cycle through over and over again to reassure the public that some progress was being made. Some weird like doublespeak about how like they would take increased casualty numbers of American soldiers and say It means we're almost going to win. It means that they're on their last legs. They're fighting back. They basically do a little, like, twist the truth whichever way they could to make it seem like we were winning, when really the truth about the Afghan war is the military brass didn't know Afghanistan, didn't know what they were doing, and botched it at almost every single level. To a point where, many of the people who were on the ground had a much deeper and fundamentally better strategic knowledge of what was going on in Afghanistan than any of the brass heads at the military-industrial complex did. So I'm going to go ahead and play this video, give myself a little bit of a break, and I really encourage everybody, check this out. This, if it didn't come at the very end of the year, I think this is, and it may end up being one of the stories of the year when we do our 2019 retrospective, but this is some incredible material. Please, everybody check it out. I'm really hoping it doesn't get buried by, some of the bigger stories going on right now, i.e. the impeachment. But, please, check this out. I'm going to go ahead and play this video. Again, this is from the Washington Post and their publication of the Afghanistan Papers.
On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes.
We've been at war for 18 years now. We're not winning, we're not losing. Presidents come and go, but nothing really seems to change.
Vital national interest to send an additional 30,000 U.S. troops to Afghanistan.
Our troops will fight to win. We will fight to win.
So how are we going to tell this story? And we thought through these documents, these first-hand interviews from people who were involved, and yet this material had been suppressed for so long, that this was an original way to tell the story of all the failures in Afghanistan.
We're basically fighting the wrong way.
We just let the Afghans rip us off because we didn't know how the story would end.
We are not really here to win.
In the fall of 2016, General Michael Flynn, who at that time was a retired U.S. general and intelligence director at the Pentagon, was working with Donald Trump on his campaign, and he was in the headlines quite a bit.
Love it. America first. America first.
And we'd heard there had been an interview done, a long interview done with Michael Flynn about the war in Afghanistan, and that this interview had been conducted by an obscure government agency called the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. Since Flynn was in the news a lot, we wanted to take a look at that interview, and so then we had to file a Freedom of Information Act request, and this dragged on for weeks, and Trump won the election, and Trump was president. Now Flynn was his national security advisor in the White House.
Good afternoon, everyone.
And ultimately, they denied us the interview. They said it wasn't a public record, so the Post had to file a lawsuit in federal court to obtain it.
Ambassadors, local, down at the local level, everybody did a great job. We're all doing a great job. Really? So if we're doing such a great job, why does it feel like we're losing?
Michael Flynn was, just unsparing in his criticism of how the war was going. Then we found out that Flynn was only one of hundreds of people who had been interviewed by this Inspector General for Afghanistan over the previous few years. So we thought, well, we want to see what everybody else had to say about the war, all these insiders and generals and diplomats. And the agency hemmed and hawed, and we won the lawsuit with Flynn, so they couldn't really say no. And it led to what ultimately was 3 years of legal battles, and we had to file a second lawsuit. We didn't start getting more of them really till 2018. There were hundreds of these. This is what we were told. Over 400 of these interviews. And the more we got, the more we realized that the patterns here of what all these people said really added up to a real indictment of how the war was fought and the policies behind it and how misguided they were. Separately, as a batch of documents, we managed to obtain hundreds of memos that Donald Rumsfeld wrote when he was the defense secretary in the Pentagon. It was the National Security Archive at George Washington University that originally obtained it. So the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, it's a mouthful. They go by the acronym SIGAR, S-I-G-A-R. They were created by Congress in 2008 to investigate fraud and abuse in the war zone. These documents that we obtained were really for a special side project that they called Lessons Learned, that they wanted to depart from their usual mission and they wanted to take a look at the policy failures behind the war. This started in 2014, they decided to do this, and the purpose at that point was they thought the war was winding down.
And by the end of next year, our war in Afghanistan will be over.
It's all ready for record.
University, and I had did a lot for years in Afghanistan, so I was quite well known.
If you're going to use a quote from me, could you run it by me?
But little did they know, the war was going to keep dragging on. In a way, these interviews are incredibly timely. There are people looking back at what went wrong, but they're still talking to the problems that exist now that still haven't been resolved, and why the war is still going on, and why the United States can't get out of it. Well, I told my editors, I said, these documents are something that first haven't seen the light of day. They were supposed to be using these interviews to publish their own report. So SIGAR, starting in 2017, started publishing some reports every once in a while, but there are these big, thick, doorstop government reports with a lot of charts and numbers, and only a few quotes from the interviews they did.
Today's report is to help U.S., Afghan, and other coalition policymakers and agencies as they prepare for that daunting task of assisting with the reintegration of
the Inspector General himself, a guy named John Sopko. At one point, I went to meet with him to tell him why I thought this information should be public, and we've already filed Freedom of Information Act requests. What's the problem? This is noteworthy. This is newsworthy. The public should know about this. And he agreed. Even this guy who's the head of this agency, who's resisting giving us the documents, he says that the documents show that the American people were lied to. We first came to your office 3 years ago, more than 3 years ago, in August of 2016, to ask for General Flynn's interview, which I haven't seen quoted in any of your lessons learned report, but it's an eyebrow-raising interview where he's very blunt about problems in the war. Why couldn't you be more forthcoming with these documents? Why did it take so long to release them?
Well, first of all, we don't have classifying authority.
Right.
So we have to send it back under FOIA, send it back to the agencies to review. And as a matter of fact, some of the material that I think may be at a Flynn interview, but I know some of the interviews, was classified.
Of the 400 interviews that were released, only about 15, 16 of them had any classified information redacted.
Yeah, but we still have to review the information. We also have to then go through a whole process on it.
But you weren't trying to slow roll it?
No. And no one's asked us to slow roll it, and we wouldn't slow roll it. I think of any Inspector General, I've probably been the most forthcoming on information. We're firm believers in openness and transparency, but we got to follow the law.
There's a clear pattern that what was said in private in these interviews contrasted so greatly with what U.S. officials, presidents, members of Congress, military commanders, what they had been saying in public over 18 years. Usually the talking points were all pretty similar. They would say the war's It's a tough place.
Conditions that are very trying.
It was a tough year.
Afghanistan, there's still fighting going on.
Increase in Taliban violence.
A higher level of violence.
But we're making progress.
Progress.
Significant progress.
You know, we're going in the right direction.
We are on the right road.
In the right direction.
And our strategy is sound.
I think it's important to understand that we do have a strategy that's quite broad.
That our strategy is succeeding.
And they would give a very detailed case for why the American people should keep having to fight this war halfway around the world. But when you read these interviews, people would say that this was a lot of spin and lies to some extent.
And after
03, 4, once we're fully engaged in both wars, I can't remember us ever saying, should we be there? Are we being useful? Are we succeeding?
There were people in the White House who were giving interviews saying very explicitly that statistics or figures about the war that were indicators of who was winning and losing or how things were going were being twisted around or manipulated or almost made up.
As intelligence makes its way up higher, it gets consolidated and it gets really, really watered down.
One of the most sobering things to read for me was just how many people involved in the war were very blunt and candid that the strategy, the war strategy under Obama and Bush and Trump, they all said it was worthless. A few excerpts that I was shocked at. I mean, there was Doug Lute, General Lute, who was the Afghan war czar in the White House for 2 administrations, Bush and Obama. So this guy was, from the White House perspective, overseeing the war. And he's saying things like, we had no idea what we were doing. He said, I bumped into an even more fundamental lack of knowledge. We were devoid of a fundamental understanding of Afghanistan. General Dan McNeil, who was a 2-time military commander there. I tried to get someone to define for me what winning meant even before I went over, and nobody could. This is the commanding officer 2 times of the military in Afghanistan. To me, it's pretty astounding. These are the people in charge of the war, essentially saying it was a disaster, and they knew it. But I don't see any of these comments in your lessons learned reports. Why didn't you include those?
And that is sort of the limitation of where we go. See, as an inspector general, I don't do policy. What all you quoted were people talking about a bad policy. So,
why did your staff interview all these people I just quoted if they aren't going to be used?
They may well be used.
But they weren't. None of those people.
Not up to now, but.
That's the whole fundamental reason questioning why the United States is there. How could you let that drop?
Well, we didn't let it drop. I mean, the stuff is available. We're still producing these reports.
We just sued you twice to get our hands on it.
I don't know if quoting General Lute saying that we screwed up or we didn't have the plan would be any more useful than the audits and investigations and other reports that we have, which make the same point.
You don't think that would be more useful than the White House war czar who admitted they had no idea what we were doing in Afghanistan, and you don't think that'd be useful to tell that to the public?
In my humble opinion, no.
When you talk about the very basics of why we were there and what they were trying to accomplish, these people who are in charge of the war, military commanders, ambassadors, people at the White House, they were very plain and blunt spoken about this, to say, we didn't have a strategy. We didn't even know who the enemy was. Who were we there to fight?
These carefully targeted actions are designed to disrupt the use of Afghanistan as a terrorist base of operations.
Well, originally, President Bush decided to start bombing Afghanistan because Osama bin Laden, he was in Afghanistan. So it seemed straightforward at the time. Well, we have to go to Afghanistan because we have to retaliate against Al-Qaeda. But in pretty short order, within several months, there weren't many Al-Qaeda left in Afghanistan. So then the war shifted, and then it became blurrier. Who were we fighting? Who was the enemy? Was it just Al-Qaeda? Was it the Taliban? Well, yeah, we were fighting the Taliban, but we didn't even have a good sense of who the Taliban were or why we were fighting them. Some of these interviews are really eye-opening from people who played a really key role, and one of them was Ambassador Ryan Crocker, who actually served as the top U.S. diplomat in Afghanistan twice, and he was also well known as U.S. ambassador to Pakistan and Iraq. So this is a very seasoned diplomat. And he told the story to these interviewers. They were asking him about an Afghan vice president and defense minister named Mohammed Fahim Khan. Ambassador Crocker told this story about how when he first met Fahim Khan, this warlord, it was in 2002.
He was giggling, and he proceeded to relate to us that a mob had gotten out of control at the airport and had murdered the Minister of Civil Aviation. And he giggled while he related this. Much later, it emerged, I don't know if it was ever verified or not, it emerged that Fahim Khan himself had the minister killed. But I certainly came out of those opening months with the feeling that even by Afghan standards, I was in the presence of a totally evil person.
You know, the good thing about Fahim Khan is that he is dead.
Yeah, and I check about every other day, and as far as I know, he's still dead.
This was one of our closest allies in Afghanistan for most of the wars. The U.S. knew it was dealing with some very, very difficult, ruthless, brutal people, but the point Crocker was making is these were our allies in the war. We had some difficult decisions to make on who we were fighting against and who we were fighting with. It makes you realize that this war is in real trouble if you can't figure out who the enemy is, why we're fighting them, and what we hope to accomplish. Now, what they've done is they've blacked out the names of probably 90% of the people they've interviewed. They also redacted some material that they said was classified. They redacted a lot of material that they just said the public has no right to know. Now, you mentioned about there's some people whose names you couldn't divulge.
Yeah.
And your staff has made the argument that they're whistleblowers. Do you see these people, these 400-some people, as whistleblowers?
When somebody comes to you with information that could be derogatory to their current job, their former job, their colleagues, we treat that information carefully.
But they didn't come to you, you went to them.
Well, we went to them, whatever. Just like a Washington Post reporter will go to somebody and somebody will say, I'll talk to you, but I don't want the information revealed.
But you're not a Washington Post reporter, you're an inspector general,
but
right?
I'm under the same restrictions about not divulging sensitive information. You may have a different objective. You want to have the name out there. You can talk to them, and that's okay. That's your job. But my job and my people's job was to try to get the information, to try to come up with best practices, with lessons learned. And if the person said, I'm not going to talk to you if you quote me, well, okay, we'll take the information anyway, because this is a different type of report than our...
You know, the Post really believes very strongly that the public has a right to know who said these things about Afghanistan. That if these people are saying that the Afghan war was screwed up, that the United States didn't know what it was doing in Afghanistan, that this is a waste of money, a waste of lives that has gone on for 18 years, those are very damning comments from people who are involved in the war. And the public has a right to know who's saying these things. They went to great lengths to hide this material from the public.
There's lack of courage.
The administration simply wasn't being held to account for what was going on in Afghanistan. There was very little high-level Congress wasn't attention criticizing.
But, you know, we just did so many things that weren't thought out systematically that ultimately doomed our mission in Afghanistan.
Hello again, everyone. That was the Afghanistan Papers, A Secret History of the War. It's kind of the main video you can find on the Washington Post expose, the Afghanistan Papers. Really recommend. There's 6 main articles you can check out. The one we quoted from earlier was At War with the Truth, specifically focusing on how the U.S. officials constantly said they were making progress and were basically lying to the American public about a war that they did not understand and a war that they didn't really know what they were doing. I want to follow up with that before we go to break. I think this ties very well into kind of just the ineptitude of the military-industrial complex to begin with, but also just kind of like our priorities as a country. Now, I want you to understand this. We spent trillions on an 18-year war that had no clear objective after the first 2 months. That's an extra 17 years and some change where we did not have to have people there at all. I think even one could argue there might have been ways to deal with the 9/11 attacks that did not require troops on the ground, but let's not do that post-game quarterbacking too much. Let's talk about something here now. This was published yesterday, December 10th, by The Intercept. Congress to vote on $22 billion defense increase 1 week after Trump slashed food stamps. This is written by Alex Emmons. Democratic and Republican lawmakers in Congress's Armed Services Committee released a comprehensive bill on Monday that would authorize $738 billion in military spending in 2020, a $22 billion increase over 2019. If passed, the bill would formally establish President Donald Trump's proposed Space Force as a sixth armed service and bring total annual Pentagon spending increases under Trump to more than $130 billion. By the way, it says a lot that the most ridiculous, Donald Trump, he talks about building a wall or a moat filled with crocodiles or, some of the other nonsensical stuff that he says. Democratic establishment has no problem using that to score points, but one of the most ridiculous things he's ever mentioned, this idea of creating a space force, but it's tied to the military-industrial complex, so here's that bipartisan rubber stamp. Oh yeah, the mainstream neoliberal Democrats love it whenever this dude does anything involving war. MSNBC, they're on his butt all the time talking about Russia this, Russia that, but he bombed Syria for dubious reasons, and all of a sudden. What's his name? He was almost came in his pants talking about Tomahawk missiles. It was pretty gross. Anyway, because blowing up things with expensive missiles makes you presidential. And anyway, article goes on. Democrats on the left flank of the party argue that the compromise signs away important restrictions on Trump's war-making powers included in the House version of the bill, where an amendment backed by progressives would have prohibited the Trump administration from using any funds to launch an unauthorized offensive war against Iran. The compromise also stripped out a measure long backed by California Democrat Ro Khanna that would have prohibited U.S. military support for the Saudi-led intervention in Yemen, and one from New Jersey Democrat Tom Malinowski that would have banned the sale of air-to-ground munitions to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. In a joint statement, presidential candidate Bernie Sanders and Ro Khanna, who is Sanders' campaign chair, called the National Defense Authorization Act a bill of astonishing moral cowardice and said that Congress should not pass the compromise version. There is no pressing reason for Congress to shower Trump, his Saudi friends, and the Pentagon contractors of the military-industrial complex with this $738 billion taxpayer giveaway right now, Sanders and Khanna said. We owe it to the American people to go back to the drawing board. Different versions of the NDAA passed the Democrat-controlled House of Reps and Republican-controlled Senate earlier this year. And for the past 3 months, members of the Armed Services Committees have been negotiating the specifics of the massive policy and funding authorization package. Most members of Congress consider the NDAA must pass legislation, so members fight to attach their amendments. But the final details were worked out behind closed doors by the committee responsible for reconciling the House and Senate versions. The top-line spending figure is consistent with a bipartisan budget deal reached earlier this year, and the basic contours of the compromise were reported last week by the Wall Street Journal. In exchange for Republicans getting to formalize Trump's touted Space Force, Democrats will get to add 12 weeks of paid parental leave for all federal employees who have worked in the government for at least a year, not just employees of the DOD who already have the benefit. Oh, Lord. So here's the negotiating table here, folks. Not only do you want to have a ridiculous, biggest appendage in the world, Army, Navy, Air Force of any country in the world. We want to tack on a ridiculous Space Force on top of it. And the Democrats, they're like, can we do less endless war? Can we kill less innocent civilians? It's like, no, just give this like very minor benefit to very specific people that, and to be fair, Republicans hate doing that. They hate doing anything good for working people at all. Yeah, like that was the compromise. All right. In addition, the bill would provide a 3.1% pay raise for members of the armed services, strengthen military housing oversight by requiring the services develop a tenants' bill of rights, expand bases for Afghans who have helped U.S. forces, and restrict the military's use of toxic PFAS chemicals on bases, which have been linked to a range of health problems for active duty personnel and a lot of people here in the state of Michigan, i.e., out in Parchment. The omission of the provisions about Saudi Arabia is particularly striking, given that Congress passed similar bipartisan measures earlier this year, one that would prohibit U.S. support for the Yemen intervention and another that aimed to block Trump's emergency arms sale to the Saudis. Trump vetoed both measures, but because the NDAA contains underlying funding authorization for the Defense Department, it would be much harder for Trump to veto the entire package. Senator Jack Reed, the top Democrat at the Senate Armed Services Committee, said he fought for those measures to be included in the final bill, but couldn't overcome opposition from Republican negotiators. Pentagon funding has divided Democrats under Trump. Those on the left and most Democrats running for president in 2020 have called for overall reductions in military spending. But in Congress, Democrats have continued to support spending packages as Trump's budget requests for the Pentagon grow larger and larger. And I'm going to scroll down near the end of the article here. But while progressives have registered a handful of protest votes against past increases, they are now coming out in force to say that such an increase shouldn't compromise domestic priorities. Mark Pocan, a Democratic representative from Wisconsin and former co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, said the 2020 increase was inexcusable while the Trump administration is cutting social programs. At the same time that this administration has cut food stamps, Medicaid, and reproductive health services from everyday Americans, this president wants to add more than $100 billion to continue endless and unauthorized wars. This is the definition of government waste. And to Pocan, I could not agree more. So we're going to take a little bit of a break. We come back. We got a couple more stories left for you. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
And you're listening to WIDR Kalamazoo. The sun says smell your feet, they stink, you never take a bath. Your nose it runs, you bust your buns, you always finish last.
It may not be apparent, but hunger is a rather prominent issue amongst the student body of West Germany. The Invisible Need Project is a multifaceted initiative that's aimed to help struggling students. Every 2 weeks, generous people donate their food to the pantry located in the Fawn Student Service buildings or other drop-off locations. All you need to do is grab a reusable bag and grab whatever food you need to help sustain yourself. If anyone's unsure when their next meal will be, or if you have a little extra food you'd be willing to donate, the food pantry is your place. If you're looking to help donate, become a volunteer, or just learn more, call 269-387-4742 or email dosa-inp@wmich.edu for details.
Welcome back, everyone out there in Radio Land. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WRDR Kalamazoo, place where we call out the BS. So, got a couple more stories for you, and I want to loop around to two last stories to talk about. Some bad news and some good news. I'll start with the bad news first. This is some bad news domestically, so just an FYI. Supreme Court leaves in place Kentucky abortion law mandating ultrasounds. And I'll explain a little bit of the context here down below. This was published December 9th. It was written by David K. Lee. This is from NBC News' website. The Supreme Court on Monday left in place a Kentucky law mandating doctors perform ultrasounds and show fetal images to patients before they can perform abortions. The High Court declined without comment to hear an appeal brought by the American Civil Liberties Union on behalf of the state's lone abortion clinic. The Kentucky law, which requires a doctor to describe an ultrasound in detail while a pregnant woman hears the fetal heartbeat, was passed in 2017. Signed by Governor Matt Bevin, an anti-abortion Republican who lost his bid for re-election last month. The ACLU had argued that the Kentucky statute had no medical basis and was designed only to coerce a woman into opting out of having an abortion. Defenders of the law said it represented a straightforward attempt to help patients make a well-informed decision. The High Court section let stand the law, which has been upheld by the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. Alexa Colby Molianes, senior staff attorney at the ACLU Reproductive Freedom Project, said the statement Monday that the High Court had rubber-stamped Kentucky's interference in the doctor-patient relationship. By refusing to review the Sixth Circuit's ruling, the Supreme Court has rubber-stamped extreme political interference in the doctor-patient relationship. Law is not only unconstitutional, but as leading medical experts and ethicists explained, deeply unethical. We're extremely disappointed that the Supreme Court will allow this blatant violation of the First Amendment and fundamental medical ethics to stand. And obviously, just to bring it home, it's basically the Kentucky law is all like, legally they can't stop you from getting an abortion, but if you come in asking for one, they're going to humiliate you by making you endure an ultrasound. Where you have to, it's basically like, how could you kill this baby? How could you possibly do this? Etc. From the, Christian right-wing legislatures who have, I'd say have probably never stepped in a Planned Parenthood, but, as history has panned out, some of those that ban abortions are the same that, pay their mistresses to go and get them. So, paraphrasing Rage, I get there. It's a very gross law. We will say, the silver lining to a lot of this stuff is we did beat back some of the really, really most draconian laws that came out post-Trump. At the same time, states are still getting away with stuff like this that literally has no basis other than trying to shame women who want or need an abortion. It's pretty gross. Something that isn't gross, some of our comrades in France, they are rising up. Oh, man. And I wanted to now, this article is from 6 days ago, so even now, it's a rapidly developing situation. But I wanted to describe a little bit of what's going on over there, because mainstream media here in the United States has not been doing a very good job at that. So this is from The Independent, and this was published 6 days ago. France national strike grinds country to halt, but government refuses to back down. One of the biggest public sector strikes to hit France in decades looks set to continue after the French government stood by its plans to introduce controversial pension reforms. And again, this whole Yellow Vest movement that's been going on for the better part of a year has everything to do with austerity and trying to pass the tax buck onto the working class. Nationwide action on Thursday paralyzed transport links in the country, while schools, hospitals, and postal services also faced severe disruption. More than 200 demonstrations took place across the country, with extensive security checks taking place in Paris. Before the protests even began on Thursday morning, police had detained around 65 people. Later in the day, riot police fired tear gas at protesters, while businesses, cafes, and restaurants along march routes were urged to close. Despite this, and this is from 6 days ago, President Macron stand by his proposed pension reforms. Under the reforms, 42 different pension schemes would be replaced by a single unified system designed to revitalize the country's economy. I put that in quotes because it's probably some hyper-capitalist plan that nobody's going to like. Those in opposition say the universal pension is an attack on workers' rights and would mean people have to work longer for less. There is no set end to the strike, and some predict it could last until at least Christmas. Similar national strikes in 1995 eventually resulted in the government capitulating to the union's key demands. Union official Christian Grolier of the Workers' Force, said, "What we're going to do is shut the economy down. People are spoiling for a fight." Oh man, I wish we could have some of that big protest energy, big BPE over here in the United States. We're still working on it. We gotta get that class consciousness going. So I think with that, we're gonna go ahead and close out the show. I want to make sure we do a little rundown of the activist calendar here. Let you know some of the events going on this week if you want to get involved in local community organizing. So, okay, that was earlier, unfortunately. But coming up on Saturday. Oh, sorry. There's usually not a whole lot going on. It's kind of a slow season. But on Sunday, or Monday, December 16th, the Vine Events Planning Session is going on in the Vine Neighborhood Association from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. And on Tuesday, December 17th, over at the Boiling Point, Kalamazoo Socialist Party is holding a post-election strategy meeting. And that is going to be from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. This has been the Hoodrat Strategist radio program. Please follow us on Facebook and YouTube. That's where we upload our episodes after the fact. Although, point of fact, this episode is not going to be uploaded until the weekend. To stand in solidarity, there is a national YouTube strike going on from November 10th to, I believe, the 14th. It's the content creators. Apparently, YouTube is targeting certain channels that aren't doing well as far as monetizing goes. This could disproportionately affect political content, particularly contents from marginalized communities. Honestly, that also includes ours. So we are going to stand in solidarity with them, and we will not be posting this episode until that strike is over. If you want to find out more about that, we will be posting some information about it on our page. Y'all been listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution. And until next time, keep on fighting for that revolution solution.